So, Dragon Ball. All of this filler, how does that make you feel? Hey guys, MasakoX here, and welcome to the beginning of our new mini-series that Haverok and I have been devising, and it's called The Psychology of Dragon Ball. This is going to be a brand new series where we're looking at some thought experiments regarding psychology and psychoanalysis with some of our favourite characters and scenarios. Granted, we are nowhere near professionals in the art of psychology or psychiatry, but we are doing our very best with the amount of research that we've done, so we may trip up on certain things, but we're going to be doing our best. Any qualified therapists or psychiatrists out there, please do not cringe. We are doing our very best here, given what we can get to. Today, we're going to be looking at the classic psychoanalysis and analytical psychology of Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung. Two of the most recognizable names in the entire field. And even popular culture for that matter, because their names come up relatively all the time. Why? For reasons. Yes, we may be aware that some of the views of these gentlemen may be a little bit dated. We're going to be just treating their thoughts and this whole thing as just some kind of intellectual exercise. Just something that we can have a little bit of fun with and just probe into the ideas of Dragon Ball, provide a new take on the whole thing. We're just reporting their thoughts from the time that they were established. Something that might provide a whole new slant for characters that you probably didn't expect. Truth be told, we're mostly going to be focusing on the ideas of repression and unconsciousness formulated, and then improved upon, by the likes of Freud, and then individuation, which was then formulated by Jung. What is individuation, I hear you say? Well, it's the lifelong psychological process of differentiation of the self. Something that can be then brought out of an individual's consciousness and then formulated and manifested into something that is truly unique to that person. Or in layman's term, it's how you become yourself. So where do we start exactly? Well, let's start in the Saiyan saga because, that's the beginning of Dragon Ball Z. We won't be really spending that much time here because the whole thing about the Saiyan saga was to establish the fact that Dragon Ball Z is vastly different to Dragon Ball, and that things are going to be mainly about pure action rather than comedy. There's going to be comedy in there, of course, but that's not going to be the main focus. But the thing that we can focus upon is Goku's revelation that he discovers the whole thing about his Saiyan nature. The differentiation, which is the biggest between Z and the original Dragon Ball. Traditionally, nature is associated with feminine traits, which means that we are going to be delving back into the art and principles of the anima and animus that we touched upon in the Super Saiyan Color Theory videos a couple of months ago. Check out those videos for more about the idea. As a quick reminder for right now, the anima is the idea that inside every man there are female qualities and psychological traits, and it's vice versa for a woman. So the anima inside of a woman is the psychological qualities of a man. The word anima originated from Latin, and it's usually associated with the idea of the breath, the spirit, the force, all some kind of really intense and probing energies. The animus, which is also a Latin term, is usually kept for more rational things. Like the rational soul, the life, mental powers, life as a whole, courage, or even desire. In the early 19th century though, it was usually referred to, the animus, as another word for temper. It was usually used in the hostile sense and trying to associate with violence and negative emotions. That's why I'm quite keen to call the first phase of Dragon Ball the female phase of Dragon Ball. Masako, Chi-Chi and Bulma don't do really anything in this arc. Why is it called the female phase? This is clearly not their best time, because Toriyama didn't care about them back then, and yes, you are partially right. But the whole feminine aura is still there. For one, the Namekians and King Cold, which we know from Toriyama's interviews back in the day, so I'm going to count that for this sake, possess the ability to give birth, as it were, so then it really does associate itself with feminine traits. And also Frieza in his design, even though he is described as androgynous, has female traits, which are not present in other big bads from Z. So when it comes to the femininity in the Frieza saga, it's a lot more hidden, discreet, nuanced. All hidden amongst the high-octane action and the intense drama, but it is still there. And after the defeat of Frieza, the ladies have a much more prominent role. Well, I mean, at least as prominent as possible at that time in the show. We all know that Toriyama struggles with writing female characters. But after Frieza, there is some sort of empowerment. What's really important here is that Bulma's motherhood is actually seen as something incredibly positive. Something that is part of Bulma's world and doesn't remove her world or just take her out of the entire thing altogether. She's not pushed into the background, she doesn't stop being an engineer or a scientist to become a full-time mother. No, she just gets on with it with Trunks in the room. She's not being negligent or anything, she's just capable of being able to do both. And while Chi-Chi's actions are often ridiculed by the sheer fact that they're just over-exaggerated and completely ridiculous from normal traits in the real world, Bulma's relationship with her son is pretty important. Yes, her role is slightly diminished during the Cell saga because understandably, there's a lot going on in that, but during the Android saga part, she is really important. Not only did she provide great support to her allies and friends, she also came up with the ultimate tactic to be able to stop Cell in his tracks. You know, the remote control that can switch the androids off. Shame Krillin had something to say about that. And also, if you think about it, when we're looking at the history of Trunks, everything worked out the way they did because of future Bulma. Without future Bulma, Trunks wouldn't have been around. He might have just been removed ages ago, and there would have been no hope of anything being able to thwart 17 and 18 of that era. She kept Trunks safe and kept Capsule Corp safe enough and functional enough to be able to continue with her research to make the time machine and then thusly provide some kind of solution to the problem that they were facing. So it's quite clear that the feminine presence in Dragon Ball is absolutely crucial. And that is of course Android 18. A female character that could stand up to the Saiyans quite easily and really show Vegeta up at that point, which he really deserved. So why isn't this part of the female phase, Masako? Well, it's got something to do with the two main antagonists at that time, Dr. Gero and Cell. Dr. Gero is a man/self-made android who creates artificial life as a hobby/thing. He therefore usurps the traditional female natural tendencies of giving birth and stuff like that by making machines and androids. And what's more interesting based on plot progression, Cell goes on from being a totally monstrous individual into something with strong masculine traits. And in order for him to become that truly masculine presence, he needs to absorb 17 and 18. They are very curious targets, not because that they are twins or Dr. Gero's other creations, like we kind of see with 13, 14, and 15, they can meld together somewhat. 17 and 18 can also represent the anima and the animus. And yes, we know that dizygotic twins don't really work that way, but we're really kind of just focusing on the narrative aspect of it, just what would work well in a story. And they can also represent the chromosomes X and Y, which would then create XY, Cell, which is a strong masculine presence. So in other words, Cell needs them to discover his human masculinity. However, Cell also decides to try and usurp the other characteristic from a narrative tale, the big bad wolf from Little Red Riding Hood. He tries to deny femininity by doing it himself by making babbies, 7 of them. He's trying to take the traits for himself, continuing Dr. Gero's sense of action, which connects the two even more. Even though you think they may not be connected because they're two different things, they are. So this is when individuation comes into play. As the endgame of the Cell saga rapidly approaches us like a colossal freight train, this is the peak moment for Goku and Gohan. They both mature, come to terms with their sense of duty, and fully acclimate themselves and establish themselves as truly developed characters. Gohan even denies Cell his usurping of 18, the anima part of him, by literally kicking her out of Cell's stomach. Yeah, that is quite powerful. So Gohan's basically going, no you don't. He knocks the beast into complete disarray and chaos without his precious anima. That's some Red Riding Hood huntsman action right there. Granted, Cell uses the memory of his full potential to come back. That Saiyan trait, you gotta love that Zenkai boost. But that's not enough to rule over a fully functional Gohan, and to a lesser extent Goku from the other world. And they finally put his reign of terror to rest. Now what about the Buu saga? Can we try and get some deep psychological meanings there? Despite the fact it's a really bizarre outing that we talked about a couple of weeks back. Well, first off, we can talk about the mention of the fall of authorities. Both Babidi, the evil master, and the Supreme Kai fall into irrelevancy very quickly, even though they're really initially described as massive tour de forces in their fields. But no, they're not important in the grand scheme of things, unfortunately. And secondly, we can talk about the repression of personal growth, as it is really described with Buu being a childlike character throughout his entire range of transformations, and especially with Kid Buu. Gohan goes through a lot and revisits some of his old traumas, and Goku fully denies all of the development that happened with him over the previous 2 sagas, essentially diminishing himself into a slightly selfish, simplistic bumpkin that we got established in the original Dragon Ball. Instead of character development, with Goku we got character regression, which is something we don't often see in the narrative world, and quite honestly, to me, it's a bit of a damn squib. Goku's running away from his problems and responsibilities, effectively acting like a Peter Pan figure, trying to keep on with the ideas of childhood and keeping things relatively simple. So then when it comes to the end of Z and the Buu saga, we go to our reverting to childhood phase. And of course in some later incarnations, GT for example, those ideas of reverting to childhood take a much more literal meaning, as we also know that GT is Goku time. And we're not talking about the marketable reasons, but we're going to leave that for another day. To sum it up, Dragon Ball Z is all about the disillusionment of one's personal growth, and instead just casting it aside for hedonistic pleasures, seeking fun, and essentially running away from your problems. It's a sense of escapism. If we were going to be a bit more cynical about things, we can really associate these ideas with a certain mangaka who was penning the whole idea of Dragon Ball in the first place. Is there some kind of connection with Toriyama running away from problems and wishing to remain a kid forever and eschewing responsibilities? Interesting food for thought there. Of course, this is only a hunch, and until the day we can actually sit down with Toriyama and ask these kind of deep questions that he probably doesn't get, we're not going to know for sure. So what do you guys think? Do you like seeing Dragon Ball in a slightly more psychological angle? Do you actually like the idea of really looking at these things even though they're a bit dated? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next one, be sure to like and subscribe. Catch you later!